Okay, it's time to get rolling. So we'd like to thank you for joining GPL Technologies and SpectraLogic for our presentation on supercharging your digital asset management. Just some housekeeping items before we get going with the presentation. I want to let you know that this presentation is being recorded and will be made available to you for viewing after its conclusion. You're attending this webinar in listen-only mode, but you have the ability to ask questions through the GoToWebinar console. So we'd appreciate you asking any questions that you have. We'll collect those questions and address them near the end of the presentation. As an extended part of the webinar, we've got a short post-presentation survey that we ask you to participate in to qualify for your attendance $25 gift card. So our presentation will begin with Memo Rojas, Chief Marketing Officer at GPL Technologies. Then we'll move to Todd Arnold, Executive Sales Rep for Media and Entertainment from Spectra, who will provide an overview of who Spectra is. And then we'll be anchored by Hossein Zayashakri, SpectraLogic Senior Vice President of Media and Entertainment Sales, who will explain how our solutions can help optimize your asset management. Then we'll close with a demonstration from Chris Genero, SpectraLogic Solution Architect. So Memo, if you would kick us off, please.
Sure. Thank you, DB. Good afternoon, good morning. We're very happy to have you with us here today. And on behalf of GPL Technologies, I want to welcome you to this great webinar. We have a lot of participants. Our partner and friends from Spectra are going to give you some great content. At the end, we're going to have, as DB indicated, space for Q&A, and we hope that you can continue this conversation after the webinar is finished. We are going to post on the social media and other places for you to follow up on this. GPL Technologies is able to help you with your IT solutions and anything and everything that relates to your infrastructure. So this is part of what we do, and we are very happy to have you here with us. So I don't want to take time away from the content, so let's start. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Memo, and we want to thank you, as Memo did, thank all of you for participating with us today, and we want to give a very special thank you to Memo and specifically GPL for inviting us to present for them today to you. We're very excited about our partnership with GPL. We've been working with them for years, and we've been working with them on both the IT and the media and entertainment side. We're going to focus a little bit on the media and entertainment side today. But we want to first just, again, thank GPL and thank you for joining us. For those of you who are not familiar with Spectra, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background, but I would imagine most of you have heard of SpectraLogic before. Basically, SpectraLogic is excuse me, let me get my slides prepared. There we go. We're a 40-year-old company. Founded in Boulder, Colorado, and our headquarters is still in Boulder, Colorado. We are privately held. We do not have outside influences on us, so we can operate like a small company, although we are rather large. We've got over 400 employees in 11 countries, over 20,000 installations around the world. Our support, our engineering, everything we do is centered out of Boulder. When you call support, engineers answer the phone from Boulder, Colorado, 24/7, 365. And I think that's a very important thing to understand about Spectra and what we do and why we've been so successful for 40 years. Those of you that do know us, you know we have a very long-term history in data storage. And the elephant in the room there is everybody sees us as the tape solution provider. That's what Spectra is. We've built our reputation on longevity, on stability, on innovation, and we have a culture of that support that I talked about earlier in that slide. But again, a lot of people look at us and say, well, they're just tape. And fortunately, that's no longer the case. For the last 10 years, we've put a lot of effort and innovation into many other aspects of the storage workflow that all of you work with. We've added flash storage, we've added NAS storage, we've added the ability to push S3 content to the cloud. We've increased our tape offerings, and we've also moved into data management solutions. those data management solutions, specifically one store cycle, is really what we want to talk to you about today. Again, we have Hossein Zia-Shakeri, who is here to present a few use cases that actually exist in the world, and we want to talk to you about those and talk about how store cycle has relieved some pain points for some of our existing customers and how it might affect you in some of the areas that you might be feeling some pain. So Hossein, if you would take it from here, and I'll help jump in, and we'll kind of tag team this thing.
And just bear with us as we shift gears to make Hossein the presenter. And Hossein, I think you may be self-muted. There you go.
All right, let me make, all right. Is my screen?
We're seeing your slides now, Hossein.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for the opportunity to speak with you. Very much appreciated. Thank you, GPL. So, as Todd said, SpectraLogic over the last 8, 9, 10 years, we sort of saw the shift in the market, and we started developing or putting tremendous amount of our resources into developing broader set of solutions that were in line with market changes and market shifts and what have you. You know, Black Pearl was probably the biggest thing that everyone noticed, and it has now become the pseudo standards in, you know, storage, lifecycle management, and tiering, and as a way to connect to the cloud. When I look at it now, Black Pearl really was ahead of its time at the time. But regardless, it has now become the pseudo standard, as I mentioned, and all that, and it's very popular out there. But that is not where we stopped. You know, that was only a starting point for SpectraLogic, because we wanted to transform ourselves, and that is not the first time that the SpectraLogic has transformed itself based on market shifts. So we have put tremendous amount of our resources and continuing in developing software and other storage platform like object storage, disk, cloud connectivity, and all of that. And a lot of our resources are now going into intelligent lifecycle management and proper tiering, so that we can increase the utilization of storage and as well as automating the workflow. So we're paying a lot of attention how do we actually solve certain issues and all that. So we're providing a lot of tools in terms of reporting, scanning, monitoring, and as ways to customize even certain workflows so that things could be more efficient. You know, these days with, you know, as we've seen with COVID, and especially in broadcast and other vertical markets, the archives became the central piece of basically a lot of operations and all that. So business continuity suddenly gained a lot more momentum, because when you look at it in a lot of entities, the availability of the archive and the accessibility of it, you know, at a moment's notice, as is most, often the case, became huge. So we've developed a lot of tools and a lot of capabilities within sort of, whether it is hardware or software or integration solution, to make sure that the content is available if and when needed at any time. And of course, with all the changes that we've seen in the industry, a lot of folks are getting away from legacy system because they have to modernize in order to be able to adapt to today's environment and what have you. So we've got quite a bit of tools to help folks who are interested to modernize and to migrate from a legacy platform to a newer platform. So, in terms of products, without getting into it, as Todd mentioned, we obviously have NAS-based solutions and object cloud connectivity. But the most important thing is basically a set of software and services to enable actual workflows. Products are great, but really ultimately what you and everybody cares about is how do you make things more efficient? How do you make things more automated so that you don't put a lot of your resources basically in administrating and managing these solutions and workflows, but rather into creative kind of work that you would do. And of course, we can mold these solutions into any architectural model that best fits your need, whether it is on-prem or whether it is cloud-based or whether it is a hybrid model of that. But you will see in a lot of our solutions that those capabilities exist well. Now, there's a huge and important aspect of this that I would like to touch on, and that is that we want the solution by itself, what Spectra offers. We've gone even further, and we've made sure that we have tight integration with almost every respectable and brand name in terms of asset management, content management, workflow automation, orchestration, and all that stuff. So we have a very rigorous certification process that we've done that. So with that said, in terms of how Spectra is changing, and it has actually, I should say, changed, and we will continue to change. That's part of our innovative culture. What I would like to do is jump into the topic of the day, which is supercharging your asset management. The way we look at the assets is we categorize them basically in two. One is basically what we call managed assets. These are the content that quite often are managed by a production asset management application, media asset management, sometimes digital asset management application. And, in post and production environment, oftentimes those are managed by an orchestration layer. So those are easy. You bring them in, you log them into your NLE and in your asset management application, you add your metadata and anything that you want to search and initiate and find or do something with, you do that basically from a single pane, and that would be the asset management layer. Now, these days, as we've gone digital, or more and more entities are becoming digital, in addition to the assets that are generated in-house, the likes of raw material or the graphics or work in progress or the camera cards and stuff like that, a lot of folks are also adding tremendous amount of digital content, whether it comes from social media or whether it comes from IP based, from web or what have you. There's a lot more content that are being generated, and these content oftentimes they are not dealt with regularly, and quite often they sit on, whether it is on ingest storage or they sit on some sort of secondary storage, the likes of Synology or others, or worse yet, oftentimes they sit on even production storage. Maybe this Avid Nexus or this Cumulo or NetApp or what have you. And what we want to talk about today is we talk about that aspects of it and how does that work in conjunction with your other assets that are managed. So Todd and I were talking about this with Chris, and we thought, what is the best way to basically talk about this? And we just thought maybe we will share with you this story about 3 customers, basically a couple of which are in LA and one in New York. And so we thought that we'd put this conversation or give it context within these cases. So the first one is, it is a studio, it is a daily show, and it is, most content is being generated in LA, and quite often it's on a daily basis in the afternoon. It is broadcasted nationally. So they have a lot of work in progress that sits on their Avid Nexus. They have a lot of content that they receive, and they may sit on QNAP or Synology, and a lot of it also on NetApp storage. They also have tremendous amount of content that comes in via that camera cards. And specifically in this particular case, they collect tremendous amount of digital assets via whether it is online or social media. These have direct relevance to what the stories that they create and tell and all that. And quite often these things are sitting, as I mentioned, on this storage. And the pain of it is that someone on a regular basis, daily or bi-daily, they would have to go through these storage volumes and literally and manually sift through those and figure out which ones the story has been told, and then move it to an LTO tape. And they were literally moving it to a standalone tape drive. They didn't have an easy way to add or any way to add metadata for it. So if they needed the content rather quickly, they didn't have an easy way to bring that content back, to search for it and bring it back so they could make it part of their story. And considering that they create stories on a daily basis, then quite often when they need something, they need it at a moment notice. So that was a huge thing And it was a painful and arduous process to go through storage volumes and figure out what needs to move where and to what tier of storage. And they basically turned into us and they asked us if there was a way to bring some degree of automation to do away with some of that pain and to automate that. And that automation also included the addition of or the adding of metadata so that they could make the searchability much easier, recovery much faster, and what have you. And one of the other long-term goals they had is that the mothership had a goal broadly that over the next few years they were going to take advantage of many cloud services relative to the different workflows that they had. So they wanted to make sure that there was that degree up there. So this is one customer case. Another customer case also in LA is that they have huge suites of Pro Tools with tremendous amount of audio files, small audio files, let's say, millions of these files. And these things were sitting basically on Cumulo and quite often for a long time. And the typical solution, as is with this or prior cases, basically that they would buy more storage today. So they wanted an easier way to decide what assets are part of what projects and move them as a whole into a lower tier of storage, maybe tape, maybe cloud, or what have you. But you know, not only be more efficient in moving all these small files, but also the additional metadata. Again, as is with all of us when we talk about is that we need to have quick access to content. So metadata is always some part of the conversation these days. And again, they needed the same thing. How do you move them? How do you tarball them or organize them? Maybe even as a complex, object or tarball it. But the whole point is to keep them together, and then to add metadata. And in this case, they wanted to put them on tape because of cost purposes and protection purposes. And they had, in this particular case, they had used a small backup application, but it simply couldn't scale relative to the amount of files, to the type of files, and what have you, and to scale it basically. So that's when they turned to us and they asked us, you know, if and what we could do to help them. And we'll come back and we'll tell you basically how we help with this scenario. A third customer that we wanted to share with you is part of a major network, the headquarters in New York. And they were part of, this group were part of production and post-production. Basically, they have a whole bunch of Avid, media composer for certain assets that they generate and they manage. But they also had a lot of other assets that were being edited, and they were creating content based on Adobe Premiere. And while the Avid generated assets were being managed by Avid PAM or Media Central PAM, the Adobe content were basically not being archived. They didn't have a good view of management. So all the work were being done in individual workstation. And initially, what we did, basically, we gave them a simple tool that we have. It's called Eon Browser to archive those assets. So each editor individually archived their own content to a black file and a tape library and object storage disk that we had prior provided for them. But these assets sat most of the time on Nexus. And, you know, Nexus, while it's a great product and all that, it basically is, you know, it's expensive if the assets that are sitting on it are basically idle. So they wanted to, they had a couple of different goals. Is first, they wanted to create a central management console or platform to manage all the assets that were being archived for Adobe. They wanted to be able to also have control who would have the ability to not only archive, but they would also wanted to limit and control who would have the ability to recover or to basically version and what have you. So that's one of the challenges that they had. But they also wanted to be able to, once they edited the content to a particular level, they wanted to throw it over the wall from New York to LA for certain levels of editing to be done, where it would come back to New York and they would basically ultimately finish it. So they wanted to have that ability as well too. So those were the kind of stuff that they needed, and they also came to us and asking for a solution, basically, how do we do that? Again, this customer, they also had Blackpool and T950. They just wanted to bring a degree of automation and management to these challenges. So these are the three scenarios that we wanted to bring in to give this conversation context. So when you look at all of these, basically, and as we look over the horizon, where hopefully we will have soon be able to take control of this COVID, we all have an expectation that there will be a mass production of assets all over, and so there's an expectation of a lot of content to come over. But anyhow, all of these showed itself in an overflowed production or disparate storage volumes all over the place, which tend to become very expensive and become very difficult to manage, to sift through and figure out how to move them to other tiers of storage where you would provide more space for all these upcoming projects and what have you. The other challenge is the fact that, not only the files are big, but also the number of files are growing. So when you look at DPX and every movies, let's say that they have hundreds of thousands of DPX files or audio files, still pictures or graphics, when you look at it, you have to bring a degree of control of how best maintain a collection of files that are associated with a particular project and managing them as such. So that was another thing. And of course, if you cannot measure, if you don't have visibility, if you do not have a way to measure, then how do you improve the process? How do you move the files to proper tier of storage? How do you find them? So all of these, basically, these massive amount of content, they manifested themselves in variety of different challenges that folks had to deal with it. And from what we've heard time and again, that quite often is, whether it is someone would take the administrative task of going through this whole thing and having to do this day in or day out. If they're luckier, maybe they do it on a weekly basis, but it is a painful process. And of course, all of these you want, just like we talk about, everybody. With all the content that we have, we all are overflowed. You've got to have metadata in order to be able to search and find what you need rather quickly to be able to tell your story or create a new story faster or what have you. So, and nowadays, when you look at this whole thing holistically and you look at basically what COVID has done, in terms of budgets, we all know where that has gone, but also in terms of collaborative work and remote access. So all of these basically turns into requirements. We have to deal with this thing in a whole different ways. So from a SpectraLogic's perspective, when we looked at this and when we see this, basically, our view is that the solution must have 4 basically fundamental attributes to deal with this. The number 1 attribute is the ability to identify. In order to do that, you want to be able to scan your volumes. Quite often what we've learned is that any environment, in any enterprise environment, it's not just a single volume. It is a production storage. It is a secondary storage. It is basically, the likes of other disks that basically they come and go like the QNAPs of the world and the Synologies of the world and what have you. And in order to be able to measure and see what you've got, you will have to be able to scan these things. And you want to do that. You don't want to basically do that manually. You want to be able to do that in an automated way at times that makes sense for you. You want to do that at a time that it doesn't affect the production or during lifetime or during time of creative work and what have you. Step number 2, the solution is going to have the ability to intelligently move the assets, select set of assets or large projects or volume, move them to another tier of storage in a way that is scalable. But a very important aspect of that is to be able to add metadata tags to it so that you can find it at a later time. Quite often, folks come and go, but a more likely scenario is that the amount of content that we have is so much that it's simply difficult to keep track of the directory structure naming, the file names, the project names, and stuff like that. And this is where metadata tags, come to rescue. The third aspect of all of this is that, in this market, media and entertainment especially, that these assets are directly related to the revenue generation. And having access to them when you want, and whether it is now or any time in the future, you want to protect them and you want to perpetuate them and you want to make sure that the content is safe. So it has to have a lot of tools that basically check proactively on the health of the content, and it secures it, whether maybe it is encryption to make sure that it's secure, and if the business requirement is also to protect them via multiple site or disaster recovery or cloud or what have you to do that. But we do all of this ultimately to provide access to the content when you want it. So wherever you move it, whether it is another volume, NAS, whether it is NFS or CEFS, Samba, or whether it is going to an object storage, be it our own object storage, be it cloud, or be it any other S3 or what have you, or whether it's going to a tape library. It doesn't matter. The point is that the end users will have a simple and easy way to find those assets. And that's basically what we've done, and that's what we've done with StoreCycle. So when you look at the first scenario, basically, while they have their I'm assuming that you will see my mouse, is that while they have their production managed asset by Interplay and production storage being Nexus and all that, the other digital asset that were unmanaged that we talked about were the camera cards, the digitized asset, the social and online media, and all the graphics and all that. We basically put a StoreCycle where StoreCycle mounts at set schedule not only their Nexus, but also all the other volumes, NetApp, QNAP, or what have you. And then based on that, once you have it, you can choose, and Chris later on is going to demo and show you that. They are able to see all the files with certain attributes in terms of age and type and patterns of access. And it also gives them a sense of the cost, where they currently are, and should they move it to another storage tier, what would be the cost saving will be to them. And at that point, they add metadata, and it basically goes to Blackpearl. Of course, both StoreCycle and Blackpearl have the ability to create content, to replicate content on the cloud or in the cloud in their native format, so that those assets could be accessed by another application that may be running in the cloud or native local or any future application that uses S3 to be able to do that. So that's what this custom, we did that. In the case number 2, basically, it was very simple. The same exact workflow, same exact set of tools for the StoreCycle to basically come on at certain time of hour, do this scan, and then at certain times that they would choose what group of files related to what project will move to what particular bucket or set of tapes, and then add metadata to it. The same exact thing, very simple, very central UI that is available. By the way, it's got a web-based user interface that they can log into from anywhere. And of course, they could scale it with any number of movers basically underneath it. So they would do that. And the third model basically is exactly the same thing. While the managed assets were being under the domain of Interplay and Nexus, the Adobe assets were being all managed and archived by StoreCycle. Now, one of the things about StoreCycle is that destinations could be any point that we can mount. If that is a remote location, that's fine. If that is cloud, that's fine. Or if it is another Blackpearl that is sitting remotely, that is fine. So StoreCycle has the capability to do that. Now, what I would like to add here also is that whether it is a StoreCycle that would replicate the content to LA or whether it is Blackpearl, both of them are able to create replications based on standard policies that you set. And we were able to do that. So ultimately, basically what StoreCycle brings to the picture is first and foremost the ability to scan content and be able to provide file attributes or project attributes to see what it is that you have and how to automate migrating. The other thing is it provides a central UI to manage any number of storage volume, be it production, be it secondary, be it tertiary, it does that. And most importantly, to add metadata. And that's probably the centerpiece of this whole thing, to be able to do that. And by automating all this process, whether it is scanning or file movement and all that, a resource, an administrative resource, or assistant editor, they do not have to spend a lot of time and sift through the files and figure out what is going on and what have you. And ultimately, obviously, is that store cycle, whether it is direct or whether it is through Blackboard, that it has connectivity to the cloud to do that. With that said, I'm going to pause for a moment to see if there are any questions while Chris prepares to do a demo. Chris?
So we'll switch gears now. I'll make Chris presenter. And Chris, you look to be self-muted.
There you are.
So
So,
we can see your demonstration. Thanks, Chris.
great. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Cool. So this is the store cycle dashboard. When you first log in, you can see here I'm running it in Chrome. It's just a web app that you log into, and this is the dashboard for the system. And all of the administration, all of the access is through this dashboard. So as an administrator, when you first get the system, you would just come here under this gearbox, and you have the ability to set up, if you have Active Directory, you can set up Active Directory. We just released a new version today. It's version 3.2 that adds Open LDAP to the ability to set up directory structures. Here you can set up users. Users are, and the way the system is licensed is based on users. So you either have administrators or you have storage managers. There is a third type of user that is unlicensed, that is an anonymous user. What they can do is see files and then request the either storage or the archive or restore of files to an administrator or a storage manager, depending on how you set the system up. You can set up departments. Departments can be a variety of things. It's a way to further delineate where things come from, who they belong to. So it could be a project name, it could be an actual department name, could be a sub-department. So you could have, for instance, we'll just call this the GPL demo, and the parent department is GPL. Oh, actually, I need to create a department for GPL. But so you can create departments and then create sub-departments from that. As you can see, it's very simple. From there, you can set up storage locations, and storage locations can be pretty much anything you want. I'm just going to edit this one. So here I have a location. This is a source file. I can assign a department to it. I could assign a cost. If I know how much these storage pools cost us to purchase, I could put in, I'll put in a big number, so we can keep track of how much the source file, the source storage costs us versus target storage. Here you can see that we can set it up to be Black Pearl as either a source or a target. The Spectre NAS, we have a very cost-effective NAS solution. Non-Spectre NAS is any third-party NAS. In this version, we do Amazon S3 and Amazon Glacier. Our next release will add Amazon, which the release today adds Amazon Deep Glacier. And our next version, which will be in a couple of months, will add Azure capabilities. So we're constantly developing this. We're constantly updating the software, and user requests are both welcome and encouraged. Here you can set it up so you either have source storage or target storage. In this case, I'm running a Linux version, and again, in the new version, we've added CIFS capability to the Linux version. Before, you would have to either have Linux for NFS or Windows for CIFS SMB. As of today, we can do, in the Linux version, we can do both NFS and CIFS mounts. Here, we can schedule, so I just have it set to scan at any time that I want to, but I can also schedule and throttle, so I can tell it what the peak hours are, how much to throttle it. I could put it on a schedule and pick days of the week that I wanted it. So it's very easy to set up both just instant scans or scheduled scans. So if you have, and the reason to do scheduled scans, one, to get it away from high network usage, but also you may have people putting things in a folder that you want to scan and migrate over time, so that you can create like a watch folder situation, so that you can scan folders and move things as needed. The same thing is true for, the same setup is true for the target storage. So here's a target. I could put in the same department. I could put in, $100 per terabyte because it's going to less expensive secondary storage or tape. Again, you see you can get the same selections so that you can schedule the targets and do off-peak hours for those kinds of things. Here's where you would set up licenses and those kinds of things. If you need notifications, there's a complete SMTP setup. Logs are available both, and I'll show you over here, for both jobs and reports. There's a database backup that you can, that we highly recommend, so that the database of StoreCycle is always backed up to a safe location. And that can be an instantaneous backup or a scheduled backup. So again, back to the dashboard. The dashboard has all the important information right at your fingertips, so you can tell how much data has been migrated and by what department. how much savings you have. You can see how much target storage you've used, the licenses that are in use. Here's a job performance graph that once we run a couple jobs, you'll see the job performance. Here's scans that have been done. And one of the things that Hussein talked about was the cost savings. You don't necessarily have to migrate data to figure out how much money you could save by moving it off of primary storage onto secondary storage. So once we've done a scan of a primary store, whether it's a directory or a volume or an entire pool of storage, we have the savings calculator that you can click on. See, you can select, the age of the system, select the size that you want to price for your savings, and then it'll either pick up based on your target and your source. It'll pick up, how much savings, and so it's very quickly based on this scan. There's 2.8 gigs, and based on these numbers, which I realize are not real, but a good indication of just a quick indication of how much you could save by moving it. So the migrates, you can either migrate, you can scan and migrate simultaneously, or you could scan a job beforehand. So here I've run a couple of scans. I'll just run a quick one. The scan rates that we've seen are dependent on the type of storage and the kind of network that you're running. This obviously is just running on my laptop, so the scans are internal. But we see upwards of 3,000 files a second for disk-based, spinning disk-based storage, and even higher than that on NVMe-based storage over a fast network. We've actually done some tests, and the migrate speeds are anywhere from several hundred megabytes a second to several gigabytes a second, again, depending on the type of storage and the network involved. So here, I'm just going to do a quick scan on the root directory of this. You can see it's run, and it completed in 2 seconds for 2.8 gigabytes. So now if I go up and do a migrate, I can just click on new migrate, give it a project name. I can say this is the project finish. And I'll just do the source that I just picked. Now, here I can actually go in, even though I've scanned this, I could say, well, only transfer this one folder. So I could select just that folder, and that's what I'm going to migrate. Even though I've scanned the entire directory, I don't necessarily have to migrate the entire directory. So I can during the migrate, I can bore down into the folder structure and just migrate what I need, or just migrate the entire thing. Here, I can, again, I said you can scan, rescan it. I'm just going to use the last scan. I'm going to do everything that I've scanned in that folder. Here, I can include or exclude types of files. I can exclude directories. I can pick a target. Since I only have one, I'll pick the one I have. And then you have your choice of keeping the source file so it makes a copy of the file to the new location. I can just leave nothing and just move it. I can create a symbolic link. So if I'm moving it to NAS, I can leave a symbolic link, which is a live link back to the file itself. And it just, when you click on it, it opens it up from that secondary location as though it's sitting on your primary storage. Or we've developed an HTML link, which is what I'm going to select. And what that enables me to do is to leave a small web page that when someone's looking at the target storage, or at the source storage rather, they will see a list of the file name with an HTML extension on it. And when they click on it, it will open a web page, and I'll show you that. The other thing we can do is we can add tags. So if we add a few tags, it just enables additional searching. These are global tags so that anytime you search on those terms, all the files with those tags will come up. And now, again, you can schedule your migration to go immediately, or you can set a time if you've got a big job and you want to schedule it for later in the day. Or you can do a recurring schedule so that it uses that watch folder idea that I talked about, so that if you have a folder that people are constantly updating, let's say it's a camera card folder, and people are constantly dropping in new data, and once a week you want to clean that out, that you know that the files have been processed and they're just sitting there, you can go in and say, okay, look for everything that's a week old and move it to secondary storage. So I'm just going to start that. It'll take I don't know, on this one it will take a few seconds. And if I come over here, we'll see the source files. See, it's already moved these files, so you can see that this now has a HTML link. So if I just click on that, this is what someone would see when they're going, okay, this is the file I want. It tells me it's been archived, tells me where it came from, what it was called, when it was archived, when it was last accessed, because that's how I set up my scan to look at last accessed. In a scan, we can look at created date, last accessed, or last modified, and we can scan accordingly. It tells me the size of the file, where it was archived to, all of that information, and then it gives me the restore now so that I can restore it back to the original location. And you can see that, it moved 2 gigs across my computer in a little less than a minute. So any questions at this point?
Hi, Chris. We did get one question that came in while you were running the demonstration that I think we'd like the team to field. I don't know if maybe you'd be the best to answer that, or Hussein or Todd. But the question was, do you have a specific integration to digital ink and paint scene sequence databases in products such as Toon Boom?
Not currently. In the what we're calling the 3.3 release, we will be releasing an open API so that third-party vendors will be able to integrate with StoreCycle. So at that point, we'll be able to look at other third-party integrations and custom integrations for those kinds of products. Great question.
Okay. And then a couple that came in earlier, which I think are just more generic to StoreCycle. But one was, are there any caveats to pulling data off of machines that generate the data when you're using StoreCycle?
No, any machine that we can mount. So in the case of NAS, we can mount any NFS or CIF share. In the case of storage systems that have clients such as StoreNext, we can direct mount by in the case of StoreNext, what we do is we install a fiber channel card in the StoreNext server and then load a StoreNext client on the server, and then we can do direct mounts of the StoreNext volumes over fiber channels so that we can transfer straight from StoreNext volumes right onto secondary storage. And whether that storage target is another NAS, or in the case of Black Pearl, we can do either object storage disk or tape. StoreCycle also can go directly to cloud. So if you have a cloud account, we just need the endpoint, and we can create a storage target that is an endpoint. StoreCycle has the ability to send to multiple targets at the same time, so that you can set up an endpoint. Let's say it's a NAS, and the other you need a copy in the cloud. We can do that in a single migration job, so that both copies are made to the respective locations.
Hey, Chris, if I may, if you don't mind, if I make a comment, we can move the files, but we can also copy the files, and you can set up a time later on when a particular file that was copied to be deleted. So you can bring some certain degree of automation to that, and that's a very, very popular thing, because you know that you're going to need a file for a while, but there's no reason for you to not copy it for protection or what have you, and then delete it later on, if that is the case.
Yeah, some of the things that we've just recently added are scheduled deletes. We've implemented, job priority, so the restore jobs go to the top of the queue, so that they get priority in the job queue. Many improvements have happened over the last couple of releases, and 90% of those are customer requests and customer needs. As we develop this, obviously the engineers talk to a number of people, but people that buy it will tell you, examples of things that they need that we may not have thought of. So, or we didn't put as much priority on. So That's why I say customer feedback is both appreciated and encouraged.
Okay, and then one more question we had, and just to remind everyone, if you've got questions, go ahead and enter those in the GoToWebinar console. But the last one we've had so far was, is StoreCycle integrated with PAMs and MAMs for the M&E vertical?
Not currently. Again, once we have the API, which will happen in a couple of months, we'll be able to have direct integration with StoreCycle.
So if I may comment, remember, StoreCycle is also for all the other assets that is not oftentimes managed by a MAM or PAM. However, we have had comments, and this is a very good question, where they may want to have a common UI to manage everything, and that's where the API comes into picture for them to be able to initiate all this function, and that's a great question.
And we also have, as an earlier development that we worked on, is a piece of software. It's a data mover without the smart interface of StoreCycle that we call Rio Broker. And for those instances where you need to have direct integration with a MAM or a PAM, then we can offer those connections through Rio Broker and get much the same functionality that StoreCycle offers. Just the interface, as Hussein said, you'd have two interfaces. So if you have storage that's not managed by an asset management system that you need to scan and migrate data off of, you'd have a StoreCycle interface. And for those storage pools that are under the asset management, you could use Rio Broker and the MAM and PAM interface. But once we have the API for StoreCycle, then we'll be able to also offer a unified interface through StoreCycle.
Okay, well, it doesn't look like we've got any more questions that have come in through the interface, but Hossein, if you've got any closing comments you'd like to make, please go ahead, or of course Chris and Todd as well.
Well, very much appreciate the opportunity to talk to you folks. One last thing that probably is of value to many organizations is that quite often organizations would like to have a way to track file movements and projects, and we would just want you to know that we, upon every job, we create a manifest where the information on who initiated the job and what files they moved and when they moved and where they moved and the cost saving and all that, that manifest exists for, for purposes that, organizations may have. So with that said, appreciate the time. Todd and Chris, if you guys have any final word, thank you kindly all.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank GPL. Again, we appreciate your time, all those that participated today. If you have any further questions or you want a one-on-one demo or anything else from us, please reach out to GPL and they'll help us schedule something and we'll get to you right away. And we look forward to presenting a little more personal on your specific workflow needs. And again, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, GPL, for having us.
Stay well.
All right, so just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us, just as Hossein and Todd have done, and want to remind everyone that there is a short survey that you'll be presented with as you exit the webinar. Please participate in that survey. That'll give you an opportunity to say, hey, I want to talk to GPL and Spectra more about things, but that will also qualify you to receive the gift card for today. So for the last time, thanks for joining us, and that concludes today's webinar.